All right. Yes, this evening our speaker is Joshua White, and we thank the Lord that he has been with us the previous presentations that have been very, very insightful. And this evening, yet again, we have another presentation from him, which talks about working with the natural schedule of development. And for those of you who are joining here for the first time, allow me to introduce our speaker so that at least you'll be able to know who will be talking to us. Joshua White is an author, he's a speaker and a child development researcher, and is also the director of A Thinking Generation Ministries, and he lives in Missouri. He specializes in early childhood education and combines modern brain science with the counsel of the Lord to present a clear, practical, and compelling path for following the Lord's plan of education. A Thinking Generation provides seminars, consultations, and media material to help families and schools around the world to understand and follow God's methods of true education. And so if you want to learn more about what a Thinking Generation is, you can actually go and check out his website, which is the same name, athinkinggeneration.org. And so today we'll be listening yet again to his presentation. And in case you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat as the presentation goes on, so that they will be handled at the end. So at the end of this presentation, we will be having some question and answer session. So kindly put your questions in the chat so that they will be able to be handled. So may God bless you all as you listen. And our speaker, this is your time. We don't want to take so much time. We know that you have prepared quite a lot for us. So this is your time. You're welcome.
Thank you, brother. And good evening to each one of you. A pleasure to be here again and to study some more together. We do have a very important topic this evening. I do want to do a little bit of review from some things we've talked about in some of our previous meetings. We talked about some of the principles of true education in our first meeting, and I just want to highlight some of those as we go into our topic tonight so that we can all make sure we're on the same direction in terms of what we're working toward in true education in the upbringing of our children. So we talked about how there are two governments in this world, and because of that, there are two systems of education. And one is focused on preparation for heaven, the other is focused on mere preparation for this earth. And we saw that the first core element of true education was redemption, which, what is redemption? It is a process of character transformation for heaven. So this is our ultimate goal, character transformation for heaven. This should be the work of every parent, every teacher, anyone who's working, well, really every one of us, because we all want to have our characters transformed for heaven. So it's not just about the children, it's about all those of all ages. We also talked about how this involves a harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. And we saw in one of the statements that we've already looked at that the physical development of a child lays a foundation for the mental and the spiritual development. This is an important key of true education. We saw that from the book Education, which states that both mental and moral or spiritual development depend on the development of the physical. And so in the first years of a child's life, the parents need to give the greatest attention to the physical development of a child. And of course, we've tended to reverse this in the world today. We focus more on the mental development in the early years, thinking that this will provide an academic readiness when in reality, the Lord has told us that we need to be focusing on physical development. And the science is now in agreement with that. And we're going to look at some of that science this evening. Um, but of course, one of the greatest concerns for Christian parents is that we are focusing on character, that we're developing a character fit for heaven. And so we also find that this is a key window of opportunity in the early years of childhood for developing character. And a lot of things that we are typically focusing on during early childhood really should be waiting. So that's just a little introduction. As we get into our topic tonight, I want us to make sure we understand what our ultimate goal is. We need to have in mind constantly a goal of preparation for heaven and character transformation. So as we go through these topics, I hope that, um, again, we can keep that in mind and it will be a help as we study our important topic tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start this presentation. Switch this over. Okay, very good. Oops. Sorry, having a little technical difficulty. There we go. All right. Excellent. So our topic is God's schedule for spiritual strength, or as has been advertised, working with a natural schedule of development. And I just want to start with an interesting statement here from the book Christian Education. Then we're going to dive into the science. But this is fascinating insight here. It tells us parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parent should open before them God's great book of nature. What a strange program for early childhood, right? It tells us, first of all, no, don't send them off to school. Parents should be the teachers. And second, don't be studying from the textbooks. Get outside, study from the book of nature. It continues to say the only schoolroom for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be in the open air, amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery, and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. Again, pretty strange in reality, telling us that until the age of 8 or 10, teachers should be the parents, textbooks should be nature, and the classroom should be the out of doors. So, very different from what we find today in the world in common early childhood education. Um, usually parents often want to get back into the workforce, and we feel like we need to give the children the academic preparedness, so we send them off to school at an early age. They're not spending a whole lot of time in nature, definitely not getting a whole lot of time outdoors. And so this is very different. And yet, let's dive into the science and see which option is going to be best. The one that we find common today or this one. Now, let's understand things have changed in early childhood education in recent years. Just for an example here, they did a study in the United States. They found in 1998, they asked kindergarten teachers if children should learn to read in kindergarten. So we're talking age 4 or 5, and they're asking the teachers, is this the right age that a child learns to read? And around 30% of teachers said yes. Well, then they asked the same question 12 years later, 2010, and they asked again, 4 or 5 years of age, is this the right age that children learn to read? Well, now it was up to 80% almost. And so what we see here is a shift of mindset in what we're expecting out of young children. In in years past, the kindergarten program used to be very hands-on, but it has shifted to become more academic. And this is to a greater or less degree all over the world. Along with that, time for art and music is dwindling. One study found, this was a 2010 study, that about 90% of kindergartners were being taught to read. 97% were in classes where composing and writing complete sentences was a needed skill, and 99% learning capitalization and punctuation. Now, don't get stuck on the numbers. The point here is just that our mindset is shifting. Another study here, school districts today report a more structured kindergarten program that centers on specific academic objectives and emulates what once was a grade 1 focus. So we're taking what we used to be teaching later and we're making it earlier. An increasing societal focus on academic readiness. So this isn't just coming from the schools, this is a societal pressure. And it has led to a focus on structured activities that are designed to promote academic results as early as preschool with a corresponding decrease in playful learning. Look, you don't have time for both, right? And so we're losing the playful learning as we begin to focus more on the academics. Teacher-led instruction in kindergartens has almost entirely replaced the active, play-based, experiential learning that we know children need from decades of research in cognitive and developmental psychology and neuroscience. So again, just illustrations here of what is changing in early childhood education. We used to involve children. We used to understand that this was essential to childhood. We would say, children need to be children. They need a chance to play. They need to be learning from hands-on everyday life. But that has shifted. We're now focusing a lot more on the academic preparedness to, again, depending a lot on the country, but to a greater or less degree. The question is this really helpful? Are we benefiting our children by this early academic focus? Or are we in the process of focusing on this, perhaps losing out, missing other things that are even more important? As we find here from this article, there is no research evidence to support claims that earlier is better. By contrast, a considerable body of evidence clearly indicates the crucial importance of play in young children's development, the value of an extended period of playful learning before the start of formal schooling, and the damaging consequences of starting the formal learning of literacy and numeracy too young. So interesting, it's saying there is no research evidence to support claims that earlier is better. Meanwhile, we're running into this earlier is better mindset, thinking we're engaging in academic preparedness when the research is not in agreement with the methods that we are implementing. And I can agree completely with what this article is saying. This area of child development has been my primary area of research um, for some time now. And I definitely agree with exactly what this is saying. There is no research evidence to support that earlier is better. And we can talk a little bit more about that later if you have questions on that. But what I want to dive into is looking at some of the science behind this. Why isn't it better to start the academics earlier? And when we say earlier, we're talking, the typical age, 3, 4, 5, something like that, depending on even 6, depending on the country. What's wrong with that? And we've already read, is it better to wait until 8 or 10 to start with the traditional academic training? So let's first of all look at some brain development and let's understand the basic schedule of brain development. Now, obviously, this is a highly complex topic. There's no way we can explore it all in just a few minutes here. We have a lot more points to mention, but I just want to give a brief overview of some of this to keep in mind. So we all know this is a neuron. It is a brain cell. It's what our brain uses for all of its functions. And there are various processes of brain development. One of the most important is something known as myelin. Myelin is an electrically insulating compound that coats the axon of the neuron, and it speeds the information transfer. Myelination is one of the most vital aspects of brain development. Along with synaptic growth and development and synaptic pruning later on, the myelination process is really key. When we see a baby learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to think and to reason, and then later on learning the academic skills, a lot of this depends on the myelination process that's occurring in the brain. The myelination of appropriate brain regions coincides with the development of specific cognitive functions, such as reading, development of vocabulary, and proficiency in executive decision making. So, again, what this is just saying is that these processes, or I should say, the ability to do these sorts of learning, like reading, vocabulary, decision making, things like that, it is based in the process of myelination. Myelination has to occur. for this to really do well. So it's important that we understand the process of myelination. If we want to be able to teach certain things, we need to know how what the schedule of this myelination process really is. And it does occur in stages and on a pretty set schedule. So if we look here, this is just a very basic overview of brain development. From conception into around 15 months, we have very basic brain development. From around 15 months into around 4.5 years, we have limbic system and relationship areas of the brain developing. And this, I should mention, is why it's very important that the little ones are with their mother as much as possible during this age. That limbic system has a lot to do with the emotional security and development of the brain and the child, as well as the relationship areas of the brain are connected with that. And a child they have to have that solid emotional connection. Research shows it's really the first 3 years of life that a child needs a constant attachment figure. When we separate them, or if there's just neglect, then we run the risk of causing anxiety problems, depression, things like that later on in life. Now, moving forward here, from around 4.5 to 7 years in girls and about 9 years in boys. Sorry, I should have corrected the slide here. It should say 7/9. But about 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys. We have the Gestalt areas of the brain developing. And then at about 7 in girls and about 9 in boys, the logic areas of the brain begin a major stage of development. This continues for some years, even into the teens. And then in around 8 years, frontal lobe development, that continues into the 30s. And I just want to focus on these areas of the brain, specifically the logic areas and the Gestalt areas of the brain. This is primarily centered in the left and right hemisphere. It is not strictly the left and right hemisphere, but we find these are the major processing centers of the brain. And it's interesting to compare the functions of each one of these. The left hemisphere tends to deal with things such as detail, parts and processes of language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, and reasoning skills. While the right hemisphere tends to deal with images, rhythm, emotion, intuition, imagination, creativity, feeling, faith, belief, and large motor control. So if we were to compare these two regions of the brain, which one would we find was very essential for academic learning? Just have a look at that for a moment. Think about it. Which one would we need if we were going to go sit down in school and learn from a textbook? I think that'd be the left hemisphere, right? You need the detail, the language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, reasoning. All of those are important for the traditional academic learning environment. All right, so let's go back here. We're going to skip through this for a moment. Okay, let's go back here to our schedule. We find the Gestalt areas that centered in the right side that focuses or has its stage of development through about 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys. The logic areas of the brain, which you've just seen were so important for academic learning, don't actually begin their major stage of development until around 7 years in girls and around 9 years in boys. Now, I hope that's making every one of us pause and think for a moment. What's a typical school starting age? Again, depending on the country, it could be 3 in some countries, up to 6. I think there's still a handful of countries keeping it at age 7. But any of these are going to be earlier, before the regions of the brain necessary for traditional academic learning are even ready, especially in boys. So the question would be, what happens? If we're trying to push a learning before the brain is really ready for it, what's going to happen? Okay, so just to summarize, so we understand this clearly, the areas of the brain responsible for many academic types of learning are not developed until around 8 years of age, and even 10 years of age in boys, sometimes even later, but this is just a generalization. The question would be, and a lot of people ask this, well, can we accelerate this? Do we have to wait until the brain is ready? Or can't we somehow train the brain for the academic learning at an earlier age? Well, as it turns out, no, we cannot accelerate this. It's a myth that we can accelerate a child's developmental milestones. Children are kind of pre-programmed to reach those points. Now, to understand exactly what happens, it's important that we realize the brain is extremely plastic in childhood, and it wants to adapt to its environment, and it has an incredible ability to compensate. It will compensate to an environment even if that environment is not ideal. So it will make do even if it is not the ideal setup and organization for the brain. So let me explain here. Let's suppose we have a child. We're asking them, we put them in class, we ask them to learn things, do an activity that they're not ready for yet. The brain, because of its desire to compensate, even if it's not a correct compensation, it wants to make do and adapt. The brain will actually compensate by utilizing another part of the brain that has developed to process the learning that should take place in a different part of the brain. So let me just say that a little bit differently so we're all clear on that. We're asking the brain to process a certain type of learning that it needs a higher thinking center developed in the logic areas of the brain. Those areas are not developed though at this age. So what the brain will do is it'll kind of look around and it says, okay, well, let me use a part that already has developed, which is just going to be very basic thinking centers of the brain at this age, especially if we're talking 4 or 5. Um, but it survives, it compensates and it makes do. So it begins to route the thinking through that part of the brain, and it forms a neural route of learning through this incorrect region of the brain. Later on, after the child has reached that age, 8, 10, 12, whatever it is, and now the brain is ready for the higher level learning, the brain already has a bad habit of learning. It already has neural routes formed through incorrect regions. And what do we see? Well, we see a learning disability. We see burnout. We see a child that can't do well in particular subjects. We see a child who hates school. And these are all very common problems today. And just to explain this very well, if a task is asked of the brain for which the corresponding region is not matured, it will form neural routes through lower, more developed sections, resulting in almost permanent organizational damage. So, trying to force a child to learn a concept for which they're not ready can actually do damage to the unmyelinated brain. This is a summary of obviously an enormous amount of research, and we would not have time to go through all of the quotes and the references thoroughly. I'd like to read a couple of statements from Dr. Jane Healy. She's an eminent educational psychologist. She's written the book Endangered Minds. She explains a lot of these same concepts. And I'll read a couple of statements from her as she says, trying to drill higher level learning into immature brains may force them to perform with lower level systems and thus impair the skill in question. So we're making the brain perform. It's compensating. It's able to do this, but we're actually hindering the skill later. Now let me give you a very practical example of this. I think one that we might almost all of us may be able to relate to. We can take a child and put them in school at an early age, and let's say we're going to teach them math. And so you sit down with a pencil and paper and you give them lots of math problems. And they've got 4 plus 6 and 4 plus 7 and 4 plus 8 and 4 plus 9. And you have lots of repetition, right? And they can do this on paper. And this type of learning requires very basic thinking skills. A lot of it just learned by rote, a lot of it's just by repetition. They often don't understand the true concept behind what they are doing, but it seems like they're learning it, and they may even get very good grades. But if we take that same child who's doing all these exercises on paper and we give them a real life math scenario, give them a word problem, we often call that, a real life scenario, or even they're just in real life and we ask them to calculate something, they will often look at you or look at the teacher and say, I don't know how to do that. And they can't figure out the answer to a real life problem when they can do the calculations on paper. But what is happening is they're able to learn with lower level systems in the brain, and they're forming neural routes with lower level systems. But we're actually impairing the skill. They aren't learning conceptually. They don't really understand what they're doing, but they're just making it through school and even getting pretty decent grades. So that's a best case scenario. What can also happen, though, that's even worse, is something known as learned helplessness, where a child, let me just actually read here. Dr. Raymond Moore explains this very well in his book, School Can Wait. The child who is required to learn things before he is ready may quickly tire of them, or he may become anxiety ridden and so frustrated that he will not try at all. So, what happens is a child, it's often subconscious, they become very frustrated with the struggles they have in learning a particular subject, and they often conclude that they're just bad at it. Maybe they say they're bad at math, they're bad at reading, they're bad at science, whatever it is. I'm just bad at that. I don't like it. And often that's simply because we tried to learn it too early. As again, Dr. Healy points out, I often wonder how many children decide they are dumb. They're not dumb, they've decided they're dumb about certain subjects, when the truth is that someone simply laid on the learning too soon in a form other than the one they needed to receive it in at the time. So, this is a common problem in schools today. And we often wonder what is causing a lot of the learning disabilities. And obviously, there are many factors for that, but this is a major cause for many learning disabilities and attention problems also, that we are simply trying to push it too early. Any learning that has to be pushed into a child may end up doing more harm than good. Plunged daily into the fire of inappropriate expectation, children's early promise shrivels and non learning becomes a habit. They may be labeled, treated, exhorted, and eventually tutored, but the basic issue remains unchanged. The school and the child are on different schedules. And I'm afraid this is the situation in the majority of education today, the school and the child on different schedules. Okay, so making this practical, what can we do? First of all, we need to be patient. All right, let's shift our mindset of what children should be learning and focus on what is important at the right time. Be patient for teaching the academics. Don't get in such a rush for that type of learning. There is much, though, that a child should be learning at an early age. One of the things they can do is learn in practical, hands on ways rather than books. Hey, do we have math in the kitchen? Yeah, of course. And you can invent it if you don't naturally have it. Is there math in the workshop? In planting a garden? It, the world is full of math. You can learn math that way. Science, do we find that in the garden? Of course. Or even just in concepts. You might even just talk about a child with it in everyday life. Um, History. You can learn history by just telling stories. There's lots of ways to learn in practical, hands on ways. This is what a child really needs, practical learning at an early age. And then the most important thing is that we're focusing on character in these early years. We'll talk a little more about this later, but I want to move to our second aspect of development here. We've seen brain development. Now let's move to eye development for a moment. The capability to use both eyes to focus on a subject, that's often referred to as eye teaming, as well as foveal focus or two-dimensional focus, foveal refinement, which results in two-dimensional focus. These two abilities, which are essential for reading, don't actually develop fully until approximately age 7 to 9. So if we're trying to ask a child to read, we're actually asking them to do something that their eyes are not physically ready for yet, nor is the brain ready for it. Even though a single clear visual image may be received by the eye, a child may still not be able to decode printed material because of deficiencies in organization and interpretation in the central nervous system due to lack of maturation. In other words, the eyes might be seeing what they're looking at, but the child is not actually able to process and decode what they're reading because the brain isn't ready. We have to realize only about 5% of vision occurs in the eyes. 95% is happening in the brain. And so we have to wait for the brain development to occur for us to get full vision processing. Now, connected with that is the physical development of the eye, as I've already mentioned. Two-dimensional focus, eye teaming, important for reading. Also, we need to consider the physical properties of the eye. The eyeball is not completely shaped with collagen fibers until approximately age 9. Long periods of reading without relaxing the focus into the distance could possibly cause inflammation and the elongation of the eyeball, leading to myopia. Now, myopia is the most common eye problem in the world today. We often call that nearsightedness, two terms for the same eye condition, nearsightedness or myopia. And myopia is increasing drastically around the world. And it's also interesting to compare the rates of myopia around the world. But first, let's understand myopia. The normal eye is rounded in shape, as we see here on the left side of our screen, with the focal point at the back of the eyeball. The myopic eye becomes elongated. And when we look at something in the distance, our eyes are at rest. However, when we focus on something up close, the muscles that control the shape of the lens, you can see that in the diagram, the lens, and around the lens is something known as the ciliary bodies, the ciliary muscles. These muscles control the shape of the lens. And when we focus on something up close, the muscles have to contract to change the shape of the lens. And this can cause well, I should explain a little bit more. This short-term contraction is called an acute spasm, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, if a child especially, and even adult, if we're focused on something up close, like reading a book or the screen, for more than about 20 minutes, then we start to enter a period of stress for the eyeball. And if this continues for long periods, we can actually cause this inflammation that we've read about because those muscles are pulling on their attachment points in the outer layers of the eyeball, which, as we've read, those outer layers of the eyeball are quite soft in childhood. So we actually, reading and spending time doing things up close can actually cause this stretching of the eyeball, which is leading to myopia. Now, it's interesting to look at the rates of myopia around the world because eye doctors have often said that myopia is genetic. You may even hear that today if you go to your eye doctor. What's causing this, doc? And he'll say, well, it's just genetic. There's not much you can do about it. However, research, if we look at the good research, it's quite clear that myopia is not only genetic, it is actually primarily a lifestyle disease. And let's look at the rates of myopia here. The US, for example, is around 50% myopic. East Asia, if we make a comparison, we find about 90% myopia in East Asia. Now, if we compare a lifestyle between these two regions of the world, we find the US child spends about half the time in doing homework that the one in East Asia does. The ones in East Asia spend a lot more time in school at an earlier age. East Asia also spends a lot more time indoors. So we have a lot higher academic pressure and time indoors, especially at an earlier age in East Asia than the US. Another interesting study that was done in Alaska. Alaska is a state of the US. It became a state quite late, and there were large populations of indigenous peoples, the Eskimo, the Inuit. And these peoples traditionally did not go to school at a very early age, at least. Well, when Alaska became a state, now they required it was an obligation that the children go to school at a traditional age, 5 or 6. And they looked at the rates of myopia in the children. And now, if myopia is genetic, we would expect to find very similar rates of myopia in the children as the parents and grandparents. In fact, we would expect to find a higher rate of myopia in the parents and grandparents, in the older generation, because the children have not developed it yet. So they looked at the rate of myopia. In the children, they found it to be around 60%. Now, again, if this is genetic, purely genetic, we would expect to find at least 60% in the parents and grandparents. So here's what they found. I don't know if we can all see it, but it was less than 1%. And it left everybody saying, kind of scratching their heads and saying, wait a minute, myopia must not be purely genetic. There must be other factors involved here. And so this set off a train of research, and the research is very clear today. This is a lifestyle factor. And again, if we compare different regions of the world, we find the regions that spend the most time indoors and in school at the earliest age have the highest rates of myopia. Across the board, every study that they do, they find this to be true. Certainly, there are genetic factors, but it is primarily lifestyle related. So again, interesting comparison. Let's add Africa, the continent of Africa, into this mix, which obviously there's a huge variation across the continent of Africa, but still, we do have large populations who are not spending so much time indoors, not so much time in school, and not so much time in school at an earlier age. The US, again, 50%. East Asia, we've already looked at that comparison, 90%. Big differences in lifestyle there. Compare this to Africa, uh, on average in the continent, 10 to 20% myopic. So interesting comparison there. Again, considering the lifestyle. They did a study in Brazil. They found within the city of Natal, it was around 13% myopia, which is pretty low. But it's interesting because they looked at the indigenous peoples around in the jungles that weren't living in the city, and they found it only to be 2.7%. So we're dealing with a generally same genetic sampling here, but there was purely a lifestyle difference. And this study was actually quite fascinating. This was done in the indigenous people of the upper Rio Negro region in the Amazon rainforest, northwestern Brazil. They found that myopia was rare among the indigenous population. And interestingly, age was not associated with the refractive errors of the indigenous people. So this was not a factor of age. This was not a matter of, oh, they're getting older, they're just developing myopia, it happens. No. What were the factors in causing it? Two factors we find here. Brazilians from the small city in which the study was performed had higher rates of myopia. So it was where they were living in the city, they had higher rates of myopia. Also, older pre-education adults had a very low prevalence of myopia, around 2%, whereas the younger, slightly educated Brazilians had a higher prevalence of myopia. So living in the city and the rate of education was most directly connected with the rate of myopia, specifically higher myopia rates. And they said in the same study, they said the low prevalence of myopia in the illiterate indigenous people is consistent with other studies and suggests that myopia is related to literacy. Now, obviously, this is not suggesting we all become illiterate, but the way literacy is typically taught, where it's taught at an early age, and children are spending a lot of time indoors, reading, having to learn, having to focus on these things up close at an early age, this is the most important causative factor in the development of myopia. So, two significant lifestyle factors here. Number one is close up work. This could be reading, this could also be spending time on a screen. Even just the close up work that we find indoors generally, even if it's three-dimensional work, it's still close to the eyes. And children actually need for proper eye development time outdoors where they get some distance vision. This is important for eye development. Connected with this also is a lack of time outdoors. There's significant research showing that children need time outdoors for proper eye development. A study from the Journal of Nature found that children who spend less time outside were at a greater risk of developing myopia. Now, remember, we've already seen this diagram. Remember that the myopic eye is elongated. With that in mind, let's read this again from this Journal of Nature. Light stimulates the release of dopamine in the retina, and this neurotransmitter, in turn, blocks the elongation of the eye during development. So we find light was actually blocking this process of myopia development in the eye, the elongation of the eyeball. So, of course, the question would be, okay, how much light? What does this mean? You're supposed to stare into a light bulb or something? No. What the research finds is children need to spend around 3 hours per day under light levels of at least 10,000 lux to be protected against myopia. Okay, so first of all, hours per day, we're talking 3 hours per day. That's a pretty significant amount of time. And that's minimum. It should be more than that. Now, 10,000 lux. How much is 10,000 lux? Well, if you go outdoors and stand on a sunny day and you stand in the shade, you get about 10,000 lux. So full sun is more than 10,000, but 10,000 lux is it's full daylight. A heavy cloud cover will bring it a bit below 10,000 lux, just for a reference point there. Lux is a measurement of the volume of light. It's not the intensity of a single light source, but the total volume of the light. So let's take a classroom here. We might have the light bulbs in the room, and we might have a window, and that light outside the window, we might be getting 10,000 lux. But as we come into the room, the light coming through that window is volume of light becomes dissipated into the volume of the room. So the lux measurement begins to drop. and it drops drastically. Um, Maybe we would think, oh, it'd go down a few hundred lux, or maybe it cut it in half. Or maybe we say it's pessimistic enough, we'd say, well, maybe a quarter, 2,500 lux. In reality, it goes to about 500. This is the average well-lit classroom or office. We're not talking about a dark one. We're talking about well-lit. It's between 5 and maybe 700 if it's really well lit. Um, unless the wall is completely glass or something. um, Basically, it's far below what is necessary for proper eye development. And again, so much research supporting this. I remember a friend of mine actually who, at the age of 12, she had severe myopia. She went to the eye doctor. Her eye doctor told her, at the rate your myopia is progressing, you'll be considered legally blind within about a year. And the mother asked the doctor, well, what's causing this? The doctor said, it's genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. The mother did some research. She found this research. She said, that's interesting because my son has perfect vision and he practically lives outside. He loves it outdoors. Whereas my daughter has this severe myopia and she doesn't like going outside. She spends most of her time indoors. So she talked with her daughter. She said, we're going to do a little experiment here. You need to go outside for a minimum of 2 hours every day. The daughter wasn't so happy about that, but she complied. 6 months later, they went back to the eye doctor. He examined her eyes and he said, I don't quite understand this, but you've not seen any progression in your myopia. They said, thank you very much. They went back home. They came back after 6 months, and now it's been a year. She should be, nearing legal blindness at this point. And the doctor examined her eyes. He said, I don't understand this. Your myopia has not progressed. It's the same as it was a year ago. And so they told the doctor what they were doing. We found this research, and the doctor, he just said, well, yeah, I think that's just coincidence. I don't think it has anything to do with it, which was unfortunate, but of course it had something to do with it. This was God's method at work. And so really, there's no way around this. Children need to spend a lot of time outdoors, several hours every day for proper eye development. Again, a lot more research that we could look on that, but again, just keeping this practical, spend several hours outside every single day. Limit the close-up work and reading, no more than about 20 minutes at a time, and limit the repetition through the day. 2 or 3 times a day is plenty from an eye development standpoint. And definitely limit and eliminate screen time. Okay, but these are not the only two factors. I've spent most time on the brain development and the eye development, but I want to quickly run through some other factors here to consider. One is physical development. We've already talked in a previous session about the importance of physical activity. We know that physical activity is vital for the development of the cerebellum, which is important for many functions. Physical activity greatly aids the development of the cerebellum. It's actually more like essential for cerebellum development. It also enhances the growth and greater connections between the neurons. And there's also something known as the proprioceptive system. This is that sense of the body in space that only comes through whole body activity. And we find that in order for a child to be able to sit still, pay attention, and visually remember the shapes of letters and numbers, which obviously that's school, the child first needs to have developed his or her proprioceptive system. That's a sense of the body in space. The only way a child develops this is through whole body activity. They need to run, they need to jump, they need to climb, they need to roll, they need to tumble, they need to do somersaults and cartwheels and all the things that children love to do. This is important for development. It's not just important, it's essential. And we actually find that many learning disabilities today are connected with an underdeveloped proprioceptive system, which can only be developed through whole body activity. So children are getting what they need, and it's actually causing learning disabilities. There's also something known as the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a chemical that is released into the brain whenever we move our muscles. So whenever we're exercising, we receive this chemical. This chemical is important for many functions, but not the least of which, vitally important for our discussion right now, is that it is required for myelination to proceed. So, and it will actually increase the myelination process, increase the speed of it and the extent. So Literally, children, again, remember, how do we receive this chemical that's important for myelination, vital for myelination? It only happens as we exercise. So literally, children need to move for their brain to develop. So as we take a child, we sit them in school, we tell them, hold still. Listen, I think we've all heard the command given to children in the classroom. It's probably been told to us, or we've told it to a student if we're a teacher here. Sit still, right? And be quiet. Sit still and be quiet. We constantly are telling our students this. And really, this is the worst thing we can do for brain development. Children need to move. We tell them to sit still, and they cannot develop their brain properly. And of course, I find this interesting because that same book, Christian Education, we started with a statement from that saying children need to be out of doors, learning from their parents until 8 or 10. And we're starting to see how the science is right along with that. It also says children should be left free as lambs to run out of doors, to be free and happy, should be allowed the most favorable opportunities to lay the foundation for sound constitutions. Now, I think it's important to remember or to realize when it says free as lambs, this does not mean they're by themselves. Think about lambs. Who's nearby? You always have the mother sheep nearby, right? Keeping a close eye. So this is not saying, parents send their kids outside and they just get no education and they just run free all day long. All we do is give them a bed and some food and just wait until they're 8 or 10. No, nothing of that sort. This is just talking about the environment that children need to be in. They need to be outdoors. They need to be running. They need to be jumping. They need that activity for proper brain development. So as much of the day should be active as possible, as much of the day as possible. Also play together. Children need companionship, and play is actually really beneficial for development. And work together. Useful work. Children need to learn useful work. This is essential for development also. Now, I mentioned sit still. What about be quiet? Let me talk a little bit about language development. We probably have all heard a group of children playing. And I say heard because they are not at all silent in their play. Children are often chattering and talking together, very, very busy as they're playing together. But what about a child by himself? I'm sure we've all noticed a child playing by himself. Is he quiet? Most of the time, no. A child playing by himself, a little child, will continue talking to whom? Well, to himself or to his toys or to his doll, whatever. They just keep this stream of consciousness speech. They're literally talking their thoughts. This is because children don't have something known as inner speech. Inner speech is the ability we have to think without saying it out loud. I mean, we all think out loud sometimes, but children actually don't have the ability to internalize their thoughts as well as adults do. So they literally need to think out loud. So just consider this for a moment. As we take a child, we sit them in school, we tell them sit still and be quiet. We are preventing their brain from developing because they don't have physical activity, and we're preventing them from thinking because they don't have a chance to talk. Children need, as it says here, good language like the synapses that make it possible is gained only from interactive engagement. Children need to talk as well as to hear. And we take a child, we tell them, sit still, be quiet, read to yourself. They're not getting anything out of that. They've got to move, they've got to talk, they've got to have that activity. So children need a quiet and simple lifestyle that gives them a chance to explore, to think, to talk to themselves. They also need some individual time with adults to help develop this dialogue, thinking skills, and language skills, which will help them academically. They need a chance to be allowed to talk to themselves. This is important for development. And by all means, talk together. Parents, I just want us to understand this. One of the most important things you can do to help your child do well academically is not putting them in early childhood programs, not putting them in tutoring programs at an early age, not buying vocabulary lists and workbooks at an early age. No, the best thing you can do to help them do well academically is what we see right here on the screen. Simply talk with them, spend time with them, build a connection with them, help them to be emotionally secure, and you are here laying a foundation for academic success. Along with that, let's talk about emotional development. This is a vital aspect. We could spend the whole hour, I think, focusing on this. The research is clear. If we take the first 3 years of life, as I mentioned earlier, children need a solid, permanent attachment figure. They need to have somebody to depend on that is with them, that they can always turn to, that doesn't leave them. So this is mother with father's help. Um, then as we enter age 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, approximately, the emotional connection does not need to be as constant, but it needs to be dependable and consistent. This is because a child is developing in these years their ability to figure things out for themselves, to think independently, to function independently on their own. This is an important developmental stage, but they need to have a secure base to turn to, somebody they can depend on, they know is always there. The problem comes when we take them and we send them to school. We're often breaking this emotional dependency. Sometimes we might think the emotional dependency is a negative thing. That's what the world tries to tell us. But the emotional dependency is actually vital for later emotional and mental health. A lot of the mental health problems, emotional health issues, anxiety, depression, things like that, that we find in adulthood can be traced back to early childhood and a lack of a secure emotional attachment. Adding to all that, the brain views emotional security as a fundamental need of survival, and emotional development forms the foundation for cognitive development. If a child does not have their emotional connection needs met in the early years of life, they actually will not be able to learn academically as well. Um, I think the best illustration I can give of this, we all have survival needs, right? We need food, shelter, warmth, water, things like that, right? So if you're out in the woods, you're out in the bush, in the forest, and you get lost, and you're in a dangerous situation, and you don't have shelter, you don't have food, you don't have water, you're lost, you don't know what to do, where to go. At that point, do you want to study algebra? I hope we all laugh at that because, of course, we don't want to study algebra right then as we're lost in the woods in a dangerous situation. Why? Because we are in that moment, we are focused on meeting our need of survival. In the early years of life, children, the, not children necessarily, but the brain views emotional security as a fundamental need of survival. If it doesn't get that emotional security, then it will begin focusing on acquiring that emotional security and it doesn't want to spend time learning. So we have a child, and this is very common in cases where we might have a divorce in, the child's parents, or there's neglect or abuse or something like that. These are extreme cases, but we often find those children struggle in school because of that emotional insecurity that they're finding. But it can even happen with any child, even if they come from a secure family. But when we break that emotional connection at 4 or 5 years of age, we send them off to school. They don't have that individual that they can depend on for their emotional needs, and the brain begins to struggle and it can cope, it can kind of suppress the needs, but we won't have the learning happening at the ideal way, in the ideal way. So, all that to say, we need to provide emotional security because it forms a foundation for cognition. And the best way we can do this is through quality relationship. Again, lots more research that I could share on that, but I see our time is fast disappearing. So I'm going to jump to our next point, and that is social development. Many parents are worried about socialization. They think their children need to go to school to get social skills, to spend time with other children the same age. Again, lots of research we could look at on that. The best explanation I have is that is a myth. Maybe that's not very convincing, but extensive research has shown what children actually need is a wide range of ages that they typically find within the family, where a child is learning from grandma or grandpa and father and mother and the siblings and the aunts and the uncles and the extended family. All of this is beneficial for a child's social development, but it can even occur just in the nuclear family, father, mother, child, a sibling or two. Um, this provides all the social needs that a child has in the first years of their life. It is a myth that children need a a peer group of the same age for proper social development. We don't find evidence for that in the research. We actually find evidence to the opposite, that children need adult contact in the early years to develop social skills properly. Because when we take children, we put them in a group of children of the same age, they might learn to socialize with that peer group with those same ages, but they're not learning true social skills, which involve being able to interact on a meaningful level with anyone of any age. And if you want more on that, I would just say you can refer to my videos online. I have lots more material on that. So let's move to our seventh point, and that is memory skills. I'm just tacking a few points here. Parents have questions on socialization, memory skills. School tends to focus heavily on memory skills. Doesn't a child need the encouragement, the development, the memorization that they get, the practice memorizing that they get in school? Again, that's another myth. We find actually the opposite is true. If we spend too much time on book learning and memorization at an early age, we find it actually weakens the memory because they're depending on the book and not using their own mind. Great example of this comes from this is actually a former professor of mine, and she wrote about Western structures meet native traditions. Interesting read. But she explains memory skills among native peoples. It's fascinating. The North Queensland Aborigines come from Australia, for example, recite a song by memory that takes 5 nights to complete. Primitive peoples can observe a herd of several hundred animals and detect the absence of a single animal and know which one it is without counting. Many of their vocabularies are full of names for very detailed aspects of the world around them. Now, I don't know the background of those listening here, but I would suspect that some of you there in Kenya may have even observed this. Especially with the Maasai peoples, they are often able to do this, where they can look at their herd of animals and they can know which one is missing, even out of large herds of animals. And this is never something that they go to school for to learn to develop their memories. It's a part of their life, and they they tend to develop it naturally. And this is common among those who have not gone to school at an early age. And a reason for this is what we find continuing here from the same book. While the schooled person depends heavily on external signs, such as the written word, to hold knowledge for him, the primitive native depends on memory. So we tend to depend on books when we're going to school, or even as an adult, we depend on Google, right? But the primitive native depends on memory. Every detail of a landscape is remembered with what seems to be a photographic memory, even the first time passing through. Though most children have an eidetic memory, it is rare among schooled adults, but not among primitive non-schooled adults. So again, just another one of those myths that we have, that you have to develop the memory skills at an early age. What children really need is a more natural environment. They will naturally develop some better memory skills as a result of that. Another big question that parents have is on reading. And again, lots of research that we could go into here. We often believe that we need to teach reading at an early age to give a good preparation for reading skills. Again, it's another myth. In fact, the research shows the opposite. Children tend to be better readers when they start a little bit later. There's often a lot of variation in when a child learns to read. The important thing is that it's done more according to the child's interest. And if a child does learn to read at an earlier age than about 9 years of age, then we do need to also keep in mind the eye development. And so it's common some children, out of their own interest, may learn to read at an earlier age than 9. But we need to make sure that we are protecting the eyes. And just being able to read doesn't mean that they should spend a long time reading. Now, let's also just consider reading age. And think about this. This is an excellent point, just as from a logical perspective here. In many schools, children are identified as behind with reading before they would have even started school in many other countries. So in some countries, they're 5, 6 years of age, and oh, they're not reading well. And we say, oh, no, they're behind. When in another country, they haven't even gone to school yet. And nobody thinks anything of that. And they learn to read just fine later on. So we need to make sure we understand there's no set age that says a child has to learn by this age or they're not going to learn reading well. No, actually, they learn better later on. The key is that we understand what lays a foundation for reading skills. This is the vital point for parents and teachers. And the research is clear on this. The foundation, for example, here from the Early Childhood Research Quarterly, the foundation of later reading, and in particular reading comprehension, is language. So the question would be, all right, we want to lay a good foundation for reading skills, which means we need to focus on language skills. How do we develop good language skills? That's a pretty simple thing to do. Everybody can do that. Every parent can do that. And that is developed through talking together. That's simple. Every parent can engage in conversation with a child. And actually, most children are pretty happy to engage in conversation. They have lots of questions. That's good. Capitalize on those questions. What you're doing actually is building a vocabulary in the mind and connecting it with real life experiences so that later when you do want to teach the reading, or maybe the child just has an interest in reading for themselves, they've got a lot to connect it to, and they'll actually learn reading much more quickly. The second thing that you can do is answer the questions, engage in the incidental learning. When a child asks you the question, Mom, how do I write my name? Or what does that letter say? Can you read me that sign? Can you read me this book? What's the name of this book? All those sort of things. You have a little moment there, here and there, just to teach a little phonics, teach the name of a letter, how it sounds, just little bits, a minute here and there. But you're putting together the building blocks in the brain. And what typically happens with a child, and I would say the great majority of cases, well supported by research, as well as my own observation and speaking with hundreds, thousands of parents around the world who have told me the same story, that when the child is ready, they will actually just teach themselves how to read. If they have a good environment, if there's some books in their environment, if they're exposed to literary things, but it's not pushed, when the brain is ready for it, it pieces together the building blocks and they'll figure out how to read on their own. With maybe sometimes just takes a little bit of instruction and encouragement. And how much better is that than the typical reading process that is borderline torture for some students? And let's give them some time to develop and let their brain be ready for it. Again, there's a lot of variation in this. Some children may be earlier than others. Just allow that chance of development. Learning to read is actually quite easy. And there's significant research on this. Let me share one study here that compared two groups of children. We can see here on the graph the group who started at age 5, represented in the blue, and then a second group who started at age 7, represented in the orange. This is measuring their average decoding and reading fluency. So if we look at the first one there, you only have the blue, that's age 5. The second one, age 6, there's a few of the second group who have taught themselves. They haven't received any instruction, but they're developing some abilities on their own. And then at age 7, we have that second group starting their official instruction. Then if we look at age 8, let's just compare these groups at age 8, and we see the earlier group is far more advanced, about double the abilities of those who started later. But then look what happens between age 8 and age 9. Fascinating. The earlier group actually didn't advance very much. They kind of plateaued in their abilities, and this is common. A child may do pretty well at first, but then they tend to level off, they plateau. Whereas those who start later more quickly advance. And we see that's exactly what happens between age 8 and 9. The group who started later actually caught up to the ones who started earlier. And then if we look at age 11, those who started later actually have passed the ones who started earlier. And this is common, especially in fluency and comprehension. Those who start later typically are far superior in fluency and comprehension skills. So it was literally a waste of time, a waste of 2 years to start at age 5. Much better to wait until the brain is ready. The children who started at 5 developed less positive attitudes to reading and showed poor text comprehension than those children who had started later. Again, lots more research that we can look at on this. I'll mention one study that was done between 2 kindergarten classrooms. They had one group who they gave extensive formal reading instruction to, and then they had another kindergarten classroom where they did not give any reading instruction, but they just gave practical, everyday science experiments. The children had a chance to experiment, to learn from everyday life. There were books there if they wanted them, but they gave no formal instruction in reading. 3 years later, in the 3rd grade, they compared the reading abilities of these 2 groups of children, and they found the group who had received 0 reading instruction were superior in their reading skills than the group who had received reading instruction at an early age. So, again, it was a waste of time, and worse than wasted because it wasn't helping them develop. They were actually better off if you waited. And that was because they had more in real life to connect it to. So when they were ready for reading, they quickly understood it, and their fluency and comprehension scores were far better. So again, keeping this practical, talk together, read to the child, allow plenty of time for movement and activity, and utilize the questions and incidental learning. A couple of other points to quickly mention here. One is the effect on boys. This is a serious attack, and again, we don't have time to get into this right now. Maybe we should do another session sometime on focused on our boys, because I think we would all recognize that our boys are under attack. What is God's purpose for the boys? First of all, let me ask that. I think we all know that it is spiritual leadership in our homes and our churches. This is not what our enemy wants. As we've seen from brain development, there's a difference. I don't like calling it a lag. I don't like saying boys are slow, but there is a difference in brain development. And because of that, approximately 2-year difference in the boys compared to the girls, all the effects that we've seen, all these negative things that we're talking about, they're going to be intensified in the boys. So we start to see symptoms, and we see this today. Just a few things to mention here. Boys today are not learning as well as girls. They receive 70% of the D's and F's given all students. That's the grading system, and in some countries, other countries use a different grading system, but these are the lowest grades. So they receive 70% of the lowest grades given all students. Boys cause 90% of classroom discipline problems. 80% of all high school dropouts are boys. Millions of boys are on Ritalin and other mind-bending control drugs, and 3 out of 4 students labeled learning disabled are boys. Why is this? Why are our boys struggling so much? It's primarily because they're not ready. They're less ready than the girls. So you take a girl, she's 6, take a boy, he's 6, put them both in school. The girl, it's a little early for both of them, but the girl is a lot more developed, and the classroom environment is more suited for a girl's style of learning. A boy needs more activity, needs more hands experience. So you put them both in school, and it's natural we're going to compare them, right? And the girl's doing okay, the boy's struggling more. And so we conclude, well, something's wrong with the boy. Well, actually, nothing's wrong with the boy. Something's wrong with the system that's trying to ask the boy to do something he's not ready for. And so what do we have? We start to see learning problems. We see ADHD, which is such a common problem today, when in reality, they don't have ADHD. They simply are a boy who needs to get outside and move. And often we give them medication, and we're actually just sedating them. We're feminizing our little boys. Again, so much more research we could look at on that, but we need to make sure we understand God has created differences. The point of it is, for any parents, any teachers here working with boys need a hands-on active learning environment. They need to go outside. They need real work. They need activity. And not be pressured into the academic study environment at too early of an age. Just to mention ADHD, they actually did a study and found that delaying kindergarten by 1 year caused a reduction in ADHD symptoms by 73%. And that's just a 1-year delay. Can you imagine if we wait till 8 or 10? The issue is that a child they're not prepared to pay attention. ADHD is also recognized by the research now. It's coming out in the research that ADHD is not a syndrome, not a disorder, as much as it is a stress response of the brain. The brain can't handle the situation. It wants to get out of it. And we're dealing with emotional and mental stress when we take a little child out of the home, we put them in the school all day long, every day, or at least a few hours every day. It's causing emotional and mental stress. And there's a stress response in the brain where the child actually the brain actually wants to get out of the situation, and it can't focus. And so that leads to what we typically diagnose as ADHD. When if we would just change the environment, we would see many of these problems absolutely disappear. And I've seen it in my personal research and observation, as well as in a lot of the research. Now, the question would be, okay, if we wait till 8 or 10, won't they be left behind? How are they going to catch up? How are we actually going to work this? Good question. It's no problem though. The reality is that when children start the academics after age 8, they usually end up far ahead of the earlier starters because when we give them time for their mind to develop, they're going to experience a lot less frustration when the academics begin, and they learn much faster because they are ready to learn it. And again, extensive research on this. I'll read a couple of statements. Dr. Raymond Moore here, in a study of 300 individuals who started school at about age 8 or later, all of them quickly caught up with their classes and in most cases performed well above the class average. And there's substantial agreement among school entrance age researchers that children who enter school later are significantly higher in academic achievement than those who enter earlier. And we say, well, how is this possible? Okay, let me explain. All of the learning necessary for success in high school can be accomplished in only 2 or 3 years of formal skill study. High school is referring to secondary school. So it's saying we only need about 2 or 3 years of primary school for a child to be ready to go to secondary school. And of course, we're all saying, well, how's that going to work? How's that even possible? Let me give a simple example here. I'm not saying this is what is taught in each grade, but let me just give a basic example of how curriculum is traditionally functions in schools today. We take first grade, standard one, and we might teach some basic math. Maybe we have a problem like this, 3 plus 5, okay? And so the child's not quite ready for it. They haven't had much real life experience. They were just having them learn from a textbook. So they're not really going to write the thinking through the correct thinking center. They don't really understand the concept, but they can do it on paper. And we have to have a lot of repetition. We have 3 plus 5, 3 plus 6, 3 plus 7, 3 plus 8, 3 plus 9, 4 plus 8, 4 plus 9, lots of repetition. This is traditional, especially in math. You really wouldn't need all that if you understood the concept. But we have to do all this repetition because we're not teaching conceptually, and we're not teaching through real life, and it's too early. The brain isn't ready. Excuse me. So, but the child makes it. They get through it. So, they figure this out by first grade. Second grade, standard 2, it comes along. What are we going to do? Well, we take the same subjects, we make it more difficult. Yeah, of course, we might add addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all these other things, but I'm just illustrating here traditional academic curriculum. Each year, we just make it a little more difficult. So second grade, again, lots of repetition. They're not learning conceptually, lots of examples on paper, but they get through it. They don't understand the concepts necessarily, but they're able to do it on paper. They might even get good grades. So third grade, standard 3, what are we going to do? Well, they've forgotten what they learned last year during the school break, so have to do some review. And now we take the same subject again, we make it more advanced. Standard 4, what are we going to do again? Again, same subjects, just more advanced. This is a traditional, it's called the spiral approach in curriculum. We just take the same subjects, we learn them over and over and over, we just make them more and more difficult each year. That's one option. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of repetition, and often a child's conceptual understanding of what they're learning suffers. So let's imagine we took a different route. Let's say we waited till third, fourth grade, 8, 10 years of age, something like that. Depends on the child, depends on their interest, depends on their development. You see what they're interested in, you see they've been exposed to in real life, they've been learning a lot of practical everyday life, having a lot of physical activity. Okay, you think, what, it's time to take what they know already in real life. Now, how do they know this from real life? Can you learn math in the kitchen? Can you learn math in the garden? Can you learn math in the carpentry shop? Of course. So there's lots of ways to learn math concepts. You may not learn every math problem, every formula, but you're understanding how math works from everyday life. So you take a child, maybe he's 8, maybe he's 9, and we ask that child, what's 3 plus 5? To take our first math problem here on the screen. And the child says, well, that's 8. Okay, let me show you how to write that, how to calculate that on paper. Okay, simple enough. All right, let's do another one. What's 14 plus 16? Well, that's 30. Okay, let me show you how to write that on paper. And in 20 minutes, you could teach a child who understands the concepts already, you could teach a child how to learn this, how to do this on paper. And now you've given them the tools, and you actually don't have to do all the repetition because he understands how it works, and he can do any number now. This is what we mean by catching up. It's not that we do each grade starting at a later age, but we actually learn from everyday life the learning is more efficient when they do start with the academic study, we might have to do a little bit of catch up, bringing them into the grade at which their age it corresponds to. But this is usually done very quickly, usually in a matter of weeks or even maybe a few weeks at the most. A child can be brought all the way up to their grade level that corresponds to their age. And I've seen it many, many times. So all of this brings us to our final point and most important point, and that is spirituality. Because when we follow this type of method, where we're learning from everyday life and getting a lot of physical activity, we can make our focus on character development in the early years because we have more time. So we come to our 12th and final point, that is the spirituality of our children. We need to recognize this is the most important. The early years are an important window of time for many aspects of, oops, sorry, there we go. You can see here on the slide, many aspects of character development. The foundation for that develop in the first 7 to 8 years of a child's life. And so when we focus on the academic things, we shouldn't really ask the question so much, can they or can't they learn that? The more important question to ask is, should they be learning it? The reality is what they need to be learning is character development. We need to be focusing on shaping a character for heaven. And along with that, the physical development that we've talked about. And that's an all day, every day sort of process. Children need a lot of physical activity and work and connection with their parents, the example, godly example of their parents, spending time together. And yes, you can add a bit of Bible study, instruction, really the Deuteronomy method, rising up, lying down, talking, walking with your children. This is what they need in the early years to focus on developing character. Later on, we can focus on the academic training. So we have this interesting statement. Parents, especially mothers, should be the only teachers of such infant minds. And if you read in the context, it says infancy is through the age of 6 or 7. They should not educate from books. The children generally will be inquisitive to learn the things of nature. They will ask questions in regard to the things they see and hear, and parents should improve the opportunity to instruct and patiently answer these little inquiries. So I would, maybe it's important to mention here, if they're going to be asking questions about nature based on their environment, where are they? Well, they're out in nature, right? So nature, agriculture, this is very important. What will be the result? They can, in this manner, get the advantage of the enemy and fortify the minds of their children by sowing good seed in their hearts, leaving no room for the bad to take root. The mother's loving instructions at a age is what is needed by children in a formation of character. So I think it's pretty clear. And I think we've seen the science that very much agrees with this, with these statements. And this is a biblical principle too. We read in Ecclesiastes, to everything there's a season, a time to every purpose under the heaven. Jesus talked about first the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear. We know that's a parallel to child development. There's a process, and we need to give, just like we would give a little plant what it needs for its stage of development. Pardon. We need to give a child what they need for their stage of development. So we come back to the statement that we started with, and that is that parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parents should open before them God's great book of nature. The only schoolroom should be the open air amid opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery, their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. A radically different plan of education compared to what we have today, although it used to be much more common in years past, centuries past, but not so common today. And yet I think we've seen just how important this is. I hope every one of us have been convicted, have been hopefully convinced as we've looked at the research. And again, there's a lot more that I could share. And I would invite any of you, if you want more information, you can go to our website, you can go to our YouTube channel, watch more videos on this, and do more research for yourself if you're interested in it. In a moment here, I'll put a couple of links that you can follow for more information. And I hope that each one of us will make the decision to educate our child according to God's plan, educate our child in a way that we focus on character development in the early years, and we focus on what is most important at the right time. So the academic training, nothing wrong with that if it's in the right focus, but it needs to happen later, and children will actually learn it better later. Whereas character, it can't happen as well later. So we need to focus on that in the early years. Really, what this is all about is not so much about what not to do. It's about what we should be doing. That we need to be focusing on preparing our children for heaven, forming a good character in the early years. And that's a full-time job. We don't have time to focus on the other things. So I pray that each one of us are helped and blessed by this. I'm going to have a word of prayer right now, and then we'll open up for questions. Our Father in heaven, thank you for all this research that is available to us. And Lord, maybe this comes to us as a bit of a shock, shakes us up in our mentality of what children need and how we should be educating them. And I pray that you'll help us and give us wisdom to implement these things in our homes, that our children can be better prepared for heaven. Thank you for the time that we've had. We ask for your guidance as we finish up with some questions. We thank you and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. What a presentation. I don't know about you, but yeah, some of the things that have been talked about today have really hit hard. And so I'll welcome Stella, who's supposed to handle our Q&A. There is already only one question in the chat, and I don't want to think that this is the only question. So this is your chance to ask all the questions you have, you know. Yes. Put all your questions in the chat, but maybe you can start with the one that has been shared by Irene, which says, what do we do if we already missed these marks? Can the situation be salvaged? Stella, you'll handle the rest.
That's that's a great question, and one I get often. Um, uh, Certainly, there is damage that is not easily salvaged, but that does not mean that the situation is hopeless. So, what I mean by that is, yes, there's permanent damage, as we talked about, but it doesn't mean we're hopeless. And I praise the Lord for that. One of the best things that we can do is to actually take a break from the academic study. And I have known young people who take, or children, they might take 6 months or a year. Just don't worry about the textbooks for a time. This gives the brain a chance to heal. And typically, when they come back to the academic study later on, they are more advanced than if they had been continuing in the academic study. And it takes everyone by surprise. Like, how is that even possible? How do they advance in academic study when they weren't even studying it? But the real life experience is so powerful for learning. And it's something that many children have missed out on if they started too early. So, can it be salvaged? First of all, take an academic detox, I call it. The brain needs a chance to heal. Separate from take a 6 months or a year break from the academic study. Secondly, do everything now that you should more. By that I mean that they need physical activity. That's very healing to the brain at any age. They need time in agriculture. Agriculture is powerful for brain healing. Again, at any age. The earlier you do it in childhood, the more effective it's going to be. But even if we're talking about a young person or an adult, nature and time in agriculture is powerful for healing the brain. Bible study is another one that is not necessarily sit down with a book Bible study. It can be more conversational, depends on, again, on the age. Time in nature, communion with God, prayer, and practical work. All of these things, everything that we've talked about, the child should be getting in the early years, do it now. It's not too late. Combine that with an academic detox, and I've known many, many children who have greatly benefited from that. One other thing you can do, depending on the subject, depending on if you notice there's a particular area that they're struggling in, You can recreate a different learning environment that tricks the brain into forming a new neural route. For example, just to give a simple example, let's say a child is struggling to learn math, and maybe they're having a problem with fractions. A lot of children have problems with fractions when learning the traditional textbook way. So if they're struggling with fractions and not really seeming to understand it well, you say, okay, you know what? Don't worry about this. Let's just take a break. And maybe the next day you're working in the kitchen and you need to measure something, or you need to divide a recipe, or you need to divide the serving among the number of people. Well, now you're doing fractions. You might not call it fractions at first, but you create a learning environment where they start to understand the concept of fractions, and you're tricking the brain into forming a new neural route. Later, you can take those real life learning experiences, begin to put them on paper. This is after weeks, months, maybe. Put them on paper, and they'll understand it a lot better. So you formed a new neural route that way. All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Brother Joshua White, for that powerful presentation. I will join my elder Safari in just saying, wow, I have been challenged this evening. And thank you for answering the question I had in my mind, that is there any way we can remedy? Some of the children were taken so early in school. Even I know some who took their children to school by 2.5 years, and now they hate school. So thank you for giving an answer to that. There's another question that is being asked. Sorry, my video has refused to come on. But Penena is asking, should children learn robotics, especially humanoid robots? And there's another question. I'll just read them and then you'll answer them together. What do we do with the boy children that we have already injured? We need more on this. And the final one is, will you be having a session in Kenya this year? Would love to hear more. You can tackle this. Or there's another one. What age, Eve asks, what age is appropriate for teaching machine learning, that is generative AI? Is this area beneficial for their brains? You can tackle those ones.
Okay, so I'll just talk about the robotics and the AI together. I think it's important to focus on what God considers to be important first. And God has given us a wealth of an endless source of research and investigation, and we don't have much time for preparation for heaven and developing characters for heaven. So I'm not going to say that, if there's an interest in robotics, I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing necessarily, but it could be distracting. It could involve excessive time on the screen, excessive time doing things that are close up, excessive time indoors rather than outdoors. So I could see some potential negatives from that. As regards AI, yes, this is all connected with teaching us not to think for ourselves. So it's much better to use physical books. I know we haven't really talked about these things much, but the research is very clear. We need to be using physical books, not the screen. Real life learning is far better for children and adults also. What do we do with boy children that we have already injured? Again, I would just refer back to what I've already said, taking the academic detox, doing everything now that you wish you'd done. Boys especially need activity and they need work, meaningful work, not just inventing jobs, but real meaningful work. As it's been said, you need to create a lifestyle in which your children are needed. That might mean you need to not have, oh, let me think of an example, not hire somebody to take care of the grounds around your house or something like that. No, your children should be involved in this. So many things that we like paying people to do for us. It's better that our children are actually involved in this. It's part of learning real life also, right? So boys need work. Boys need real hands-on activity. They need hard work. They need exercise. And this is lacking in so many of our boys today. The exercise and physical activity is very important for male development, even affect male hormone levels, which are then connected with motivation and drive, which our boys are so suffering in today. Maybe we need to plan a later session on issues with boys. But in summary, they need activity. Take the academic detox. That's going to be very helpful. Will I be having a session in Kenya this year? I will actually in December. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to announce it yet, but some of you may be aware of the Prophesy Again conference. And so just be in tune for the announcements regarding that, but I will be at the Prophesy Again conference. I will be there for the entire event, doing speaking and for seminars, and also available for counseling and consulting. All right.
Okay, thank you. There's Mitch. I know our time is fast spent, but Mitch is asking, what about those of us who live in cities? And so there is no much activity to engage the kids during the week when the parents are at work. How can we help?
Fantastic question. The first thing, set your sights on getting out of the city as fast as possible. Not the rest way, but make it a top priority. I understand that it requires a sacrifice, is difficult for many. It may seem impossible for many. But the Lord has told us that we need to be living in the countries, especially the families. The city is not the correct environment for children, for the reason here mentioned, and many other reasons. The influence being a factor also. We need to place ourselves in country settings. So make that a priority. Work toward that earnestly. Be saving money, be sacrificing what you need to, do without, do with less, economize, and be willing to take steps. Put your feet in the Jordan River and allow the Lord to open the way. Make that a focus. In the meantime, do what you can to create a country environment in the city. You know, I know some families, maybe they have a little of land or even a few pots under a windowsill to plant some herbs or some plants. Do a little bit of agriculture, even if it's indoor agriculture under a window. Whenever the parents are not working, then there should be time. Well, let me actually tackle that in two parts here. Ideally, you need to have one parent staying at home. And I recognize again, that's a huge sacrifice for men. But again, take the step, prioritize, economize, and allow the Lord to open the way and to provide. Ideally, the mother should be at home. This is the best. It's really essential for development, especially if the children are young. So again, that's another thing to be working toward. And even if you are living in the city, try to have plenty of activity. Don't just sit indoors and be on the screen. Find places nearby that you might be able to go to, maybe a park or something to spend some more time in. Maybe you have a church member who has a garden and you could go work in that garden, spend time in the garden. Most people love help in their gardens. Maybe you know someone who does live outside the city and you can go visit on a regular basis. Do what you can to create the activity for your children. Don't just throw up your hands and say, oh, there's nothing I can do. Work earnestly toward the ideal, and in the meantime, do whatever you can to provide a better environment.
Right. Thank you very much, Brother Joshua White. This has been truly a thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure most of us are just scratching our heads and wondering, what did we do taking our children so early to formal education, and how do we get out of this? But thank you so much. I think there's one last question from Eve. She says, how do you help kids who've been forced to learn too early and now hate formal school? What are some of the practical steps we can take?
Yeah, again, just what I've talked about, that school detox is really key. Maybe I should think about putting this actually as a blog post on our website soon, because I get a lot of questions on this. So you can stay tuned to our blog. I will see about hopefully getting that out there sometime. But again, the school detox is extremely important. And the brain just needs a chance to heal. You need to get away from that. And then as much as you can make the learning practical in everyday life, now they're going to see a reason for it. And that's going to help them enjoy it more. The key is to take some time and don't worry so much about it's hard because we think, oh, they're going to miss out on something. Really, they won't. They, by keeping them with that academic pressure, that's what's actually causing them to miss out on proper development. So take a break. It's the best thing you can do, and focus on practical learning in the meantime.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure most of us are struggling with that because there's some children who are taken early and now they don't want to see school. So thank you so much, and we are looking forward to that blog post that you will put up concerning that, because I know it's a concern for most of the parents, especially here where we are. Many of the children are taken early to school because both parents are working, trying to make ends meet and all those things. So thank you again for taking this time to answer these questions.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am going to request if you would
Thank you.
offer the closing
Stella?
prayer.
Stella, I have one question. If I could ask, my name is Fee. Thank you, Joshua, Elder Joshua, for that insightful message for today. It's very challenging. I wanted to ask, for at least some of us who are beginning and we have tried to do our level best, there's this issue of Bible stories where we have to read the lesson books, and so they are very young. It's now even it's like 0 to I think 1. Now it's 2, then 2 to 3. How are we supposed to go about that? Because I mean, we're supposed to be reading to them. Some they don't even understand. They keep on scribbling on their books and they tear them. How are we supposed to go about that? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Well, I think I would first of all say, as you say, we're supposed to be doing this, and I would say supposed to according to who? Not according to God. We've already looked at how that's not the ideal environment. And so we need to just take a step back and say, okay, what's really important? A child will learn more from the time they spend with their parent than they will from any amount of Bible stories and lesson books that we can give them. So make sure that becomes the focus. Don't get so focused on the content, focus more on the connection. You understand what I mean? Not so much on information, focus on relation. This is what's going to teach a child more. And we're told that in terms of spiritual instruction to the child in the context of family worship, that it should be short and to the point. Don't let it drag on forever. Don't make it, boring by reading long lessons. Little lessons oft repeated throughout the day. That's the method given in Deuteronomy. It's not so focused on long lessons in biblical instruction. What we're doing is we're laying a foundation through connection. That's going to actually create more of an interest in the child's heart. And then little by little, through these little smaller lessons that we're doing, they become a little bit longer and longer as the child grows. We develop more of an interest in spiritual things. When they're more developed, able to sit still and focus, then we get to doing more deep Bible study. But we've already laid an excellent foundation and an interest in the Bible through our own example, through time together, and through connection. So that's a great question. I just want to before we finish, throw out a couple of links that I mentioned. The first one is the YouTube channel. I mentioned there's more research that you can find on this, more videos that I've done. So there is our YouTube channel. There's some playlists there from presentations from various locations. You can find lots of great information there. And then 2 resources that I wanted to share from our website. The first one, just pulling it up here so I can send a link. First one is a book called School Can Wait. You saw me quoting from that book. This is by Dr. Raymond Moore, who was actually a Seventh-day Adventist. He's since passed away. And it's an excellent source of research that's available on our website. And then, quite exciting, actually, a new book that is just released. We've just released it on a practical level, how to actually do true education, how to do God's plan of education. This is an excellent resource, and I'm going to put that here. Here we go. This one, my own mother actually wrote, and I've edited it recently, and it's an excellent resource. I can recommend it for any parent here. So those are some resources I will leave you with, and I pray that they're helpful. thank you again for your time. I look forward to meeting again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Brother Joshua White, for taking your time for giving us this presentation, this very insightful presentation, and for sharing these resources. I hope that we will all find time to go through the resources and be blessed. And as Elder JT says, we need to find time to implement these truths that we continue to learn every day. It's not only important to listen, but also to put them into practice. So before we close, before I make the final remarks, I'd like to invite you, Brother Joshua, to pray for us, and then we'll make the announcements after that. Give us a benediction.
Okay, very good. Yes, let's pray. Father in heaven, again, we're grateful for the time that we've had, grateful for your many blessings to us, grateful for such a wealth of research that we can pull from and understand better the plan that you have for educating our children. I just want to lift up each family here, that you'll give them wisdom, guidance in the application of these things. Maybe some of us feel, past the ideal point, but we know, Lord, that it's never too late. And you are merciful. You work with us in our situation. You wink at our ignorance in times past, but now you call us to repent. So I pray that you will help us to make whatever change we need, and that each family here can raise their children for the kingdom. We thank you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much once again. And thank you for taking your time for the last 3 months, May, June, and now July, for giving us these 3 presentations. We pray that the Lord will continue to richly bless you, that you continue being a blessing to other people around the world. We can only say, Mungu akubariki, meaning God bless you abundantly. Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening's presentation. Join us again in August 26th, same time, same channel. And I'd like to remind us that the recording for today's program will be available on our YouTube channel. That's Advent Hope Community Church. Very soon, our technical team will put it there. So may God bless you. Thank you for being patient with us. It's taken longer than it ought to, but you will agree with me that it was a very important presentation, thought-provoking. May God help us to put it into practice. So until we meet again next time, good night, and thank you everyone for coming. God bless you.